you have the Islamists, and then you have the trans people who like want to join with them, but it doesn't make any sense because the Islamists would kill them, right? They openly say that
Yeah,
they would
or they convert them. Yeah, at best.
convert them, kill them,
Yeah,
burn them alive, throw them off buildings, something. They can't stay as
yeah,
they are.
yeah. No, no. Yeah,
Okay, some kind of drastic change must occur.
yeah.
Okay, um, and and you say it doesn't make sense, but I say it makes sense.
Okay.
And we've spoken about it, because they're both Gnostic cultists, right?
Yeah.
But there's an angle here, and this is specifically from the Torah. What the Torah teaches about a Molech. See, they're a Molech. The
Yeah.
LGBTQ, free Palestine people,
Yeah.
and and then the regular old Islamist free Palestine people, right?
Yeah.
They're all a Molech, just different types of a Molech. And what is it about a Molech? What it is? How do you recognize a Molech? What's characteristic about them? They would they're so fanatical about their Jew hatred. It's characteristic of a Molech to such an extent that they would sacrifice their own lives, right, to diminish, to harm, kill, or just ruin a Jew's day.
Yeah.
That's what the Torah
They
says
would
about.
they would cut off their nose and split their face.
Right. They would see when folks, just to give you an indication, Amalek was the first nation that attacked the Jewish people after the Exodus from Egypt, right? Because the whole world had heard what God had done for Israel, for the Jewish people, right? And they were scared of the Jewish people because God had destroyed the greatest empire on earth in the history of recorded history, right? For the sake of the Jews. And
Yeah.
everybody was scared. I'm not saying anybody liked the Jewish people, but at least people were scared. They're like, maybe let's stay out of their way. Maybe let's not attack them. Maybe let's, kind of like just stay out of it. We're
Yeah.
not going to mess with them
Yeah.
because look what God did to Egypt.
Correct.
Now, Amalek was a special breed where they knew what God did for it, and they were worried. Their primary concern was not their own well being, but the fact that they were worried that the Jewish people, by their presence, right, would be respected by the world for what God did for them.
Yeah.
And why were they worried about that? Because they hate the idea of God being involved in the affairs of men. That is what the main issue of Amalek was. They didn't they weren't atheists. They didn't have a necessarily a problem with God, recognizing God as the creator,
Yeah.
but they could not tolerate the idea that God would be involved in their affairs on a day-to-day basis. Like, you know, especially when they heard the kind of stuff that God wants from humanity, the standards. And and no one was a big fan of it really because it places a limitation. It makes you conscientious of what you're putting in your body,
Yeah.
of how you're treating your fellow man and your fellow creature in general. It limits the kind of sex you can have and with whom and with when and where, right? You can't have sex with animals, you can't have sex with children, you can't have sex with with same sex, right? There's so limited. So that's what was bothering them more than anything else. They were the primary Gnostic nation, okay? And the Jews represented God meddling in the affairs of man.
Yeah.
So they were so intolerant of that idea that they literally would throw themselves, they
Yeah.
would kamikaze themselves
Yeah.
by attacking the Jews, knowing that God would destroy them,
We,
knowing that they would not. But so what were they trying to accomplish? If See, everybody else was scared to touch them, right? But if Amalek showed that they could attack the Jews, that was like a chink. That was like the first chink in the armor. that God had established for the Jewish people, right? They brought down the mightiness of the nation of Israel. They made the nation of Israel seem less mighty. They made it seem like you could attack the Jews. It made the Jews more vulnerable, right, for the other nations. So Amalek is the type of person who sacrifices themselves just to show everybody else that it's not such a crazy idea to attack the Jews. So now think about the LGBTQ
Yeah.
trans,
Yeah.
right, who want to ally themselves with Islamists
Yeah.
who say stay away from us, we'll burn you alive.
Yeah.
Why? Why are they? It's because those trans are have the same problem
Yeah.
that Amalek had.
Yeah.
They want they don't want any limitation on anything.
I know.
They don't want God butting into their daily affairs. They don't want God telling them you can't harass little girls. You can't be a grown man who decides that you're going to be a woman named Stephanie,
Yeah.
and you're going to be you're 45 years old, but you pretend to be 7, and you want to go and pee next to little girls in the ladies' room, right? They don't want anybody interfering with that.
Frank, you know how we know what you're saying checks out? Because it's gotten to a point where, well, two things happened when, all these like, and this is something that, I can't take this too much more of this. When the so-called Israel advocacy industry comes and says, "Look, we have Tel Aviv. We are the LGBT capital of the world." And these people, you know what they come back with? It's Amalek. You guys are pink washing the occupation. What are they really saying? They're really saying that we know you guys are not supposed, you're not supposed to be espousing this. You're Israel. This is not supposed to be your calling card. And the second thing I would say, I forgot, it
Can
escaped
I
me now.
can I rephrase what you just
Yeah,
said
yeah,
before you? I'll let you
yeah,
continue.
yeah,
But basically, what they're saying is the 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 rest of the world is saying to the
yeah,
Jews in Israel who think that they're part of the LGBTQ
yeah,
community.
yeah,
Okay, they're saying that you guys are LARPing. You're not
yeah.
real
Correct.
LGBTQ because
LGBT.
if you were, you wouldn't be able to tolerate any normal Jews.
You wouldn't be able to tolerate Jerusalem. You wouldn't be able to tolerate
Yeah,
Judea
you
and
wouldn't be able
Samaria.
to live in proximity to them. You
Correct.
can't.
In the
You
same
wouldn't feel
country. Yeah.
you wouldn't feel comfortable in that place. It's
Y-
too close
You
to
wouldn't you
the
wouldn't have them
Torah.
as your family members. You wouldn't have you wouldn't have the Torah people
Yeah.
and it wouldn't, The second thing that I noticed
Yeah, no,
happen is that
and they're saying that what they're saying is that you might think that you're LGBTQ,
yeah,
but you don't understand that the Torah, you're so close to it that it's going to change you. You're not going to stay
yeah,
permanently.
correct. And the second thing I noticed that happened, it's almost like I feel bad for these people, the people that thought that they were part of the movement and all that stuff, and then they tried to join, the movement, and they're like they were basically pushed out because there's also Zionists, the ones in America. They were pushed out of LGBTQ. They were pushed out of, you know, they were pushed out of the whatever, the pink hat thing and all that stuff. Feminism, all those things. They realized that the woke are not with them. They're not with the woke. They're not with them. And they're just like they don't know what the heck is going on. They have no home anymore. Some of them realize, oh, you know what? I'm just gonna stand with Israel, and I'm not gonna align myself with the. Basically, they had their crestfallen from this whole thing. They realized that these people, their own so-called people hate them.
Yeah.
So, in a way, it's good. It's a wake-up call, but it was a harsh one for a lot of them.
Yeah. So I guess like just to wrap up this point, they're both kamikaze Amalek,
Yeah,
the Islamists
yeah,
and the LGBTQ.
yeah.
Did I get that right?
LGBT. No, yeah,
What did
they,
I
they'll
say?
they'll add those letters too. LGDP.
Everything after the B is new.
Yeah, yeah,
The letter people.
yeah,
Okay. Uh, they're also kamikaze uh, Jew hater, Amalekites. That's what they are. So it really actually makes sense. People don't understand how much overlap there is between these two camps. They look different, but they're really the same. They're both fanatics. They're both willing to die. They both would rather die than tolerate something that limits them and their lusts. They both have world views that justify them fulfilling their sick lusts in slightly different ways. Like Muslims can do everything that the LGBTQ people can do
Yeah.
in the course of jihad.
Yeah.
So while fighting jihad, you can rape men and little children, and you can murder, kill, and you could do everything.
Even have like with animals. Yeah.
With animals. Yeah, you got to practice with animals so that you can do it. It's part of training for jihad. So you can train for jihad. You could even have gay sex while training for jihad, right? So it's really pretty much the same thing, except slightly different styles, but it's essentially the same. So much overlap. They're both Gnostic Satanists, okay? And they cannot stand any limitation
Yeah.
on fulfilling of their, their proclivities, their lusts. Okay.